Hello and welcome to another edition of PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale history, where today we'll be looking at a very unique stage which brings together Ape Escape and Resistance, which are introduced in the last stage. But there are a few other surprises in store as well, so let's take a closer look, shall we? The original Ape Escape featured a storyline where Spectre, who we'll discuss more later, broke into the lab belonging to a man known only as the Professor and activated his time machine prototype, spreading monkeys throughout time to cause havoc and mayhem and shenanigans. Spike followed Spectre and the monkeys through time using the Professor's device. The name of this device? The Time Station, which of course serves the basis for the stage of PlayStation All-Stars. However, there's a bit of a disconnect between Ape Escape and the PlayStation All-Stars stage. In Ape Escape, the time station was typically your level hub, dumping Spike in a futuristic space where he could play mini-games, brush up on how to use his various gadgets, save the game, or hop on the large central button to get access to all the different levels. As you can see, the stage looks a little different to this area. Instead, we need to look at the Professor's lab itself, which had a teleporter to the time station. This was an area we didn't get to see a lot of in the original game, as it only appeared in a couple of cutscenes, once at the beginning of the game and again towards the end as Spike's time travelling reached the present day again. Since we only really get a good look at the lab in a cutscene where Spike glances around and we briefly see the lab from his perspective, here's a still of it. As you can see, the lab was dominated by the large teleporter in the middle of the room, with various computers and gadgets dotted about. The teleporter was fed by two pipes at the side of the room marked 1 and 2. This is the basis for the stage in PlayStation All-Stars. The teleporter dominates much of the stage and the numbered pipes are also visible behind it. There are computers in the same positions as they were in the original on the left and the right. At the beginning of Ape Escape, Spike arrived in the lab to witness monkeys running riot and activating the teleporter. When this happened, the gravity in the room reduced severely, pulling everyone and everything not belted down into the air, with many of the monkeys and Spike being pulled in by its power. Following this, a few boxes fell to the floor when normal gravity was restored. These boxes can be seen in the background of Time Station in PlayStation All-Stars, which is interesting since they only appeared in that one cutscene in the original game. The teleporter gets activated a few times, prompting the same gravity reduction on fighters and causing trouble for anyone setting up combos. But who activates it? We've mentioned Spectre very briefly before, but let's talk about him a little more in depth. Spectre was the primary antagonist of the Ape Escape series, who was initially a simple albino monkey who performed a juggling act at an amusement park, which was also apparently a circus and a zoo. Spectre became evil when he gained hyper-intelligence through the Peak Point helmet, an experimental device that enhanced his IQ and made him resent humanity. Ever since, he made an effort to produce his own helmets designed to give to other monkeys in order to enhance their intelligence as well, creating the Peepo monkeys of the series, with Peepo being short for Peak Point Helmet. The reason for this?
I'm going to conquer the world!
Of course. In the first game, his plan was to send monkeys through time in order to change history, but other games just involved him attempting to overthrow humanity in the present day. Spectre appears in PlayStation All-Stars, manipulating the Time Station teleporter just like he did at the beginning of Ape Escape, in an attempt to call forth something deadly to take down the other characters. He also taunts the fighters, with some of his lines being taken from the UK dub of Ape Escape 2, especially as his All-Stars appearance has the same voice actor.
Hello there, human friends. How are you today?
Hello, human friends. How are you?
This should be a lot of fun.
This should be a lot of fun.
Finally, the lab belonged to an old man known only as the Professor, a scientific genius who also built many of Spike's gadgets. He also had a lab assistant known as Natsumi, Natalie, or Katie, depending on which game you were playing and what country you live in. She was typically more visible than the Professor and would often act as Spike and other protagonists' key support character, offering help and advice as you progress through the games. The Professor and Natalie appear on one of the screens in Time Station in PlayStation All-Stars, and interestingly, the image of them is seemingly taken from the very first Ape Escape when Spectre had taken over the lab and tied them up. It initially looks like a screenshot, but on closer inspection the two of them blink occasionally, which seems more like Superbot actually recreated the scene, low polygon counts and everything, just as a throwback to the game's PS1 roots, which is pretty cool. So now, let's take a look at the music. So in the last stage video we talked about the Resistance series and mentioned how the United States got invaded in the second game. In the third game we found ourselves in an America overrun by the Chimera as humanity tried to battle against them and reclaim their lives from the alien menace. Resistance 3 put you in the shoes of Joseph Capelli, another soldier in the fight against the Chimera, replacing Nathan Hale from the first two games. In this game he journeyed to New York in an attempt to shut down a control tower and prevent the invasion from getting worse. Along the way, he helped out various different groups of people in their own personal battles against the aliens. For example, in Pennsylvania, Joe visited the township of Mount Pleasant, where he met a deeply religious group who feared attacks from a particularly vicious Chimerian beast that they called Satan due to their belief that it was literally the devil. And guess what? You had to go down into the mines to face off against Satan and save the township. Hooray! Satan, as you would probably expect, was a formidable opponent, being a huge alien monster thing that was roughly the same size as many of the mining tunnels and had an impenetrable carbon exoskeleton. It also had tentacles on its face and was pretty speedy. The strategy for defeating it involved shooting it in the eyes and then throwing explosive gas canisters in its mouth to damage it, ultimately blowing up after a minecart chase and Joe getting cornered in a service lift. Satan is summoned into Time Station by Spectre, where it stomps about and roars a lot. Its primary mode of attack is an acid attack that it spits all over the stage, causing a poison effect. In addition, in Resistance 3 you could encounter spores dotted around the landscape. These alien plants were deadly and would explode if attacked. However, they could prove useful if enemies could be lured near them, as firing at them would catch enemies in the crossfire and cause damage. They were capable of damaging Joseph too, however, so it was best not to get too close. Satan's lair was also full of these and could be used to cause damage to Satan during the minecart chase, allowing you to get away from it. These spores can also be seen infecting Time Station when Satan arrives. They don't serve any gameplay function, instead seem to be there to indicate that Satan's presence is potentially spreading the Chimeran virus into the Ape Escape world, as the spores infecting the lab are not a good thing. There's not much else to talk about from Resistance on this stage, so the only thing left is to look at the music. See, back in Sandover Village we talked about lurker sharks, which acted as a deadly barrier to prevent Jack from swimming too far out in the first Jak and Daxter game. In Hades we also looked at harpies, a recurring enemy in the God of War series. Both of these are dud enemies that Spectre calls on before turning to Satan. The lurker shark just swims around in a bubble of water, while the harpy just flies in a circle carrying a peepo monkey. Not going too in depth with these two however, since they've been covered in previous videos. But they aren't the only dud mashups that Spectre can summon. Let's talk about Vermin, another vehicle available in Twisted Metal 2012. It was a pest control van converted into a killing machine. On its roof it had a missile known as the Rat Rocket, and this acted as the vehicle's special weapon. An alternate special allowed you to steer this rocket manually. Vermin turns up in Time Station occasionally, where it will remain parked on the teleporter while a peepo monkey rides the Rat Rocket around, although the rocket doesn't hit the stage at all. In the Patapon games, many levels saw you going up against rival armies or going hunting, but occasionally some levels forced you to face off against a gigantic beast of some kind. Among these was a giant enemy crab known as Theokina, who attacked using claws and sleep-inducing bubbles. Defeating her resulted in a new unit called Megapons, so the challenge was worth it. Theokina also sometimes appears as a dud enemy in Time Station in PlayStation All-Stars. She doesn't do anything here however, and actually looks surprisingly tiny considering how big she was in Patapon. Finally, back in Emmett's video I mentioned how Starhawk was a spiritual successor to multiplayer-only title Warhawk, which involved various vehicles including the titular Warhawk, a heavily armoured plane. As a nod to this little-known cult title, a Warhawk also turns up in Time Station as the final extra enemy that Spectre summons before Satan, but unlike the others, the Warhawk can damage fighters since it fires missiles at the stage as it hovers around. And that's everything for Time Station. I hope you've enjoyed this video and I'll see you next time. Otanashimini!